This is Artful Discourse, your weekly escape into the vibrant world of creativity, culture, and intellectual exploration. I'm your host, Benjamin Kirk, and I invite you to join me on a journey through the rich tapestry of human thought and the beating heart of artistic expression at Fresno State's College of Arts and Humanities. Day of Giving was November 2nd, 2023, and the College of Arts and Humanities once again had an excellent showing. Preliminary numbers show over $48,000 was raised from 280 gifts. A large portion of that was raised for the Dean's Council Annual Fund. The Dean's Council has a unique structure. About half the funds go to endowed scholarships, and more than a dozen students across all the college's departments receive scholarships every year. The other half goes to the Dean's Discretionary Fund. This is used for student books, tools, supplies, publications, and music production, computer and electronic equipment and software, and student, faculty, and staff travel for a variety of purposes, such as meetings, conferences, professional associations, or research activities. My guest today is artist and recent graduate Sarah Theller. As a graduate student in the art history program, Sarah received the Dean's Council funding to travel to Copenhagen, Denmark, and study a tiny gilt silver figurine from the late Iron Age Scandinavia that was found in 2012 called the Valkyrie of Hårby. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Well, Sarah, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Benjamin. Thank you for having me.
All right. Besides being an art historian, you are a phenomenal artist in your own right.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
So what do you love about art?
It's probably incredibly cliche to say that I love the expression of art, but it's the expression. It's the complete freedom to experiment and do whatever you want to do on a page or whatever ground you're working with. Um, I don't know. I feel like I've found out a lot about myself through art, and I've worked through a lot of things through art, and I think I love art because it's healing, it's human, and it's very expressive.
All right. Now, your thesis was titled The Gilded Valkyrie, How Christianization and Binary Concepts Distort the Interpretation of Viking Iconography. Now, that's a long title,
Yes.
a lot, and it's pretty loaded too. So can you break it down for me? Tell me a little bit about your thesis.
Sure. So the Gilded Valkyrie, this is referring to the Hårby figure, the Valkyrie of Hårby, that is this gilded silver figurine. Um, and then the rest of the title, How Christianization and Binary Constructs. Uh, the Christianization aspect refers to historical period of Christian conversion of Scandinavian peoples. And, this majorly impacted not only their timeline, but how the rest of history has unfolded, um, which leads into the binary constructs, because I discuss a little bit in my thesis, but there's a way that we conceptualize ourselves, and our community, depending on what we believe in, the way that we picture the universe and the way that we picture ourselves within the universe. So because there was this Christian influence and this Christian conversion, I looked at how we conceptualize these peoples after Christianization,
Right.
because Christianization is what left us a lot of the evidence that we use to say what Vikings believed in.
Now, as far as Vikings go, did they have their own written language prior to Christianity?
No. Maybe no is a little harsh, but there was not a common literacy. There was not a
Mhm.
common written language. There were runes, but these were extremely esoteric almost. They're very limited on who can access those or know what they mean, or, actually engage with the rune writing. It's called Fusark or Futhark. But this writing is very associated with magic and knowledge and
Mhm.
power. So it was very limited on who could actually access it.
Mm. And so it seems kind of from reading your thesis a little bit that it a lot of what we know about Vikings in that time period comes from the writings that happened after Christianity came into the picture.
Yes, exactly.
And
Exactly.
then everything else we have is just artifacts.
Yes. So we have predominantly writings by Christian authors, and not even necessarily writings from the time that they're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to um, the Christian Bible. It was written a couple hundred years after the events that it's describing, uh, the central events that it's describing, and then but it's still considered almost a historical fact. It's
Mm-hmm.
considered that way. Um, Same sort of thing with the writings about the Vikings. It was written 200-300 years after the initial start of conversion and the massive historical changes that were occurring, but then they wrote the histories down way later
Right.
after they were already um I don't want to say tainted.
Right. After I think I get what you're saying. It's
Hmm.
kind of like it's their perception of what
Yeah,
happened,
for sure.
and
Exactly.
in their perception of what happened, it would be like us writing about something that happened in the 1700s, or even earlier, by not looking at the writing, by just going off of
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
verbal record.
And a lot of the people who knew that original oral tradition, obviously were already passed and gone, and
Hmm.
that had just everything had shifted from that point.
Now, I did find it interesting that there did seem to be one exception, and that was an Islamic writer
Yes.
who came. And can you talk about a little bit about that? Maybe not get into too much of the gruesome details, because it did get a little crazy there.
For sure, for sure. So this writing, it is one of the only exceptions that we really know of. Um, this writing that I'm talking about is a diary entry written by a man named Ibn Fadlan, and Ibn Fadlan was a an Islamic diplomat who was traveling through Rus territory uh, in modern day Russia. So he was with Vikings who lived in modern day Russia. And he was at I'm trying to remember specifics, but he was at a funeral for a Viking chieftain. And it was a funeral festival for about 10 days
Hmm.
that Ibn Fadlan witnessed. So he's writing this diary entry as he's witnessing these events. So it is not a text that's written after the happenings. It's our most direct written source that we have about the Vikings, but it is still removed because it's written in Arabic and it's written by, um, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's a man who's removed from this society or this culture or this spirituality or this language.
Right.
Um, but he gives some very interesting descriptions of the funeral, which kind of informed a lot of my ideas about the Valkyrie
Hmm.
and which informed what I think the figurine might represent.
Through the Dean's Council Annual Fund, funded in part by Day of Giving, you were able to view and study the tiny figurine labeled the Valkyrie of Harpy in person. So tell me about that experience. What was the setting? What was it like to see the figurine in person?
Yeah. Um, I got a little nostalgic, a little emotional just from that question. It was an incredible experience. Um, so I had traveled before as a study abroad. I had
Hmm.
gone to London in 2019, but then this experience at the beginning of 2023 in January, I traveled completely by myself to go see this figurine, and it was beyond anything I've ever experienced before. Um, because it was a totally different way of traveling, I
Hmm.
guess, than being in this group, and I was completely by myself, so I could totally focus on my mission, you
Right.
know. Um, so I got to Denmark, and like the next day, because I pretty much went to my hotel and went to sleep. But the next day, as early as I could, as early as it opened, I went to the National Museum of Copenhagen,
Mm-hmm.
and I went and saw the figurine right away.
Yeah.
Um, it took me not long at all to find it, even though it was so tiny. It's it's easy to miss because of how tiny it is, but I also knew what I was looking for, and I was able to just zero in and get it. Um,
So describe it just a little bit to me. Like you say, it's tiny. How tiny is this thing? Because I've seen pictures of it, and it is a little bit intricate too, as well. So
it's maybe the width of my pinky, maybe,
wow.
but it's a little bit shorter than my thumb.
Mm-hmm.
It's very small.
And is it broken?
It is.
Okay. Yeah.
It is the feet, and maybe mid leg is broken off. We can't quite tell where it was supposed to end, but the bottom is broken.
And gilded to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that it was made out of another material and then silver was put over it, like shaped to it almost.
So it was made of silver, like the core of it is silver,
Mm.
and the gilding over top of it, it's a very thin layer of gold.
Ah.
So it looks like it's gold, but it's not actually gold underneath.
It's only silver.
It's only silver.
So, were you able to handle it?
No.
Okay. Okay. I was just
Unfortunately.
curious. Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But you were able to talk to some experts while you were there.
I was. I was able to meet with Dr. Peter Pence, an archaeologist and researcher at the National Museum,
Mm-hmm.
and he he gave me some stellar advice. He gave me resources, and um, yeah, we talked for probably 2 hours
Yeah.
just in the exhibit.
Mm-hmm. Now, at that time, had you formulated kind of an idea, or were you still formulating it? Did you discuss that with him at all?
I was I was maybe halfway through my thesis.
Mm-hmm.
As far as typing it, I was pretty well done with all of my thoughts and my theories, and I just hadn't fully fleshed everything out yet. Um, but the trip was really to hone in and just confirm everything,
Mm-hmm.
because there's only so much I can do on a computer as far as like seeing the images, and then um, I don't know. There was something about just traveling to the area itself too,
Yeah.
not just being in the United States talking about this completely different country.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me more about that.
Sure.
Well,
Um,
well, okay. So this is Copenhagen,
yeah.
correct? So you flew into Copenhagen. What was it like being there? Because you yourself are kind of a Viking descendant to some extent, right?
To some extent, yeah. This feels goofy. It felt kind of like being home. It just felt
Mm-hmm.
very comfortable. I felt safe. It felt familiar in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time completely new. Because like I said, I'd been to Europe before, but it was, a completely new part of Europe for me. Um, Everyone was so kind, which like shouldn't be a surprise, but I feel like sometimes we get used to inner cities in the U.S. where everybody is a little hasty.
Mm-hmm.
But I, within 5 minutes of being in the country, I asked someone for directions, and he like completely stopped his family, and they walked me through like directions on how to get to the train in the airport, and he was just so nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, tell me more about gender in the religious lens. For example, you talked a little bit about gendered iconography and how some things like hair tied in a knot was viewed as female, right?
Mhm.
And can you give some other examples of that and how that could possibly distort the views?
The the not being female as distorting views?
I think what it was they assigned certain iconography to genders, right?
Right,
So
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Um, okay, so first I think I'll start with a little bit of gender in religion. So I talk about gender in religion or gender in spirituality in the thesis because I think I kind of touched on it earlier, but like how we view ourselves and our community is very centered on how we believe the universe works or um, how the universe functions, whether or not there are gods or a single god, whether or not there's supernatural uh, beings or deities or
Hmm.
what have you. That informs how you will relate yourself and how others will relate to you. So with the Harby figurine, um, the figurine has this very prominent knot at the back of the head. It's a ponytail that's tied without, a scrunchie. It's pulled into a knot. This symbol is very important because a lot of researchers with this figurine tend to say that the knot is symbolic of her feminine being or her womanhood or whatever. It feels simplistic to me that symbol is being reduced to just being it's a ponytail. So it just means that she's a female. Um, because there's many images um, that show that this knot is not just being used to show like, oh, it's a girl or oh, it's a female. It shows something more complex because we have images where traditional markers of gender tend to be confused.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is archaeologists have looked at images from Viking art and have assigned, in a way, um, pants or trousers as being a marker of male imagery, or it's a depiction of a male or a man,
Hmm.
and dresses, skirts, anything kind of flowing as being a marker of female, feminine, it's a woman. They've also assigned long hair and short hair that way, or beards and long hair
Yeah.
that way. Um, but there's images where these distinguishing markers are confused. So we'll have um, a person who has pants on, but they also have like a long knotted ponytail, but no beard, or they do have a beard as well. So it's very confusing
Hmm.
because we have these supposed markers of gender, but then a whole lot of exceptions.
Right. Now, with the particular piece, the Valkyrie of Hårby that you were studying, there does seem to be some conflicting gender as far as my Western mind looks at it anyway, where the it does appear to be a female figure, but at the same time armed
Yes.
with
Yeah.
shield and does it have a sword as well?
Yes, she carries a double-edged sword in her hand and then a shield in the other.
I guess where I'm confused a little bit is why is this important? Is it important that they're gendered properly? Or does gender not even matter in this case? Or is it something in between?
It's To me it's something in between. Um I don't really think it matters whether the Harpy figure is a man or a woman or neither or
Mm-hmm.
both. Um because the question of what the figure is doing or what the figure is representing truly hasn't been answered.
Okay.
Um, it seems like to me there's a lot of focus in that in this field and in this research, in this particular um, figurine that's being researched. They're trying to identify it. There has been a lot of attempt to identify the figure rather than focus on what is the figure doing or what does it represent. Um, so they're saying like, oh, it's a Valkyrie. It's one of Odin's servants, rather than focusing more on like what could the symbols represent to the people who made it, who made this image.
Do you have an opinion on it?
About what I think it is?
Yeah.
I do.
Would you like to share that?
I I think that the Hårby figure, for lack of a better term, is a charm of
Mm-hmm.
sorts. I think it was because of how small it is. I think it was for an individual person. It's not a monument. It's not been to be seen by a bunch of people. Um, but I think it could have been some sort of pendant or applique because of the way that at the bottom
Right.
there's some evidence of how it
Mm-hmm.
could have been used there. But as far as the actual symbolism, I think that because of the very elaborate dress, this was a very elite person, or um, the concept that's being represented shows a very elite person. The ponytail knot shows a very powerful person because I think that the knot represents power because of where it's used and how it's used in
Mm-hmm.
other images. Um, and then the combination of the sword and the shield. This figure is extremely powerful.
Mm.
They might have been wealthy or well regarded in their community. Or if they weren't, an actual person, it's a concept.
Mm-hmm.
This concept is well regarded in their community.
So almost like a charm that represents power. To
Yes.
really boil it down.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that this would have been possessed by someone potentially that the charm represents.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Harvey figure is a Valkyrie in the sense that Valkyries are priestesses. They weren't servants of Odin.
Right.
They are, these real beings that represent this very spiritual concept.
Now, we talked a lot about the lens or the framework of Christianity that has traditionally been used inadvertently to interpret a lot of these pieces. But what frameworks did you use to interpret the piece, and what are some of the conclusions? Well, about what the figurine says about early Scandinavian society.
So as far as frameworks, I did use a lot of modern frameworks, and I address that. Um, so I use quite a bit of gender and feminist theories, modern theory, but I do make sure to say, because I know that they're all modern and I'm applying it to this ancient culture. Um, the way that we look at gender now is not at all the way that people would have looked at gender 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the way that we're thinking now that gender represents more. It's more social, and it can be gender itself can be this framework to help us look at another society or another culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it to me it was this way of conceptualizing and trying to make a model of the way that these people might have thought about themselves and other people 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Now, I'm just curious. Did you run your thesis by some of the people you worked with in Denmark?
I did send it to the two researchers that I worked with directly, and then a third researcher that I just kind of emailed with.
Mm-hmm.
And they all said thank you that they received it, but I didn't hear anything back after that.
I was just curious. Yeah, if you
Yeah.
heard any feedback.
I mean, they're all very, very busy.
Yeah. It is a very long
Yes,
thesis.
it's a very long thesis.
So, no, I was just curious if you had heard feedback from any other experts on the subject.
I did. I kind of pitched my idea of what I thought about the Harpy figure to Dr. Pence while I was in Denmark, and he
Mm-hmm.
just sat there and nodded to me. Of
Mm-hmm.
like it seemed to strike him as well that he thought that Valkyrie um, is more aligned with a priestess rather than a servant.
Mm. All right. So switching gears a little bit, at the end of your tenure. So this is in the spring of last year. You did a senior art exhibit as well. So not only did you do a thesis, an incredibly long thesis, we're talking 250 plus pages, right?
Yeah, 215.
Oh, 215. Okay. And then, so it's long. It's long.
It's
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a good read though. It's a good
Thank
read.
you.
But you also did the senior art exhibit, which is what a traditional art student would do, like a painting student would do.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was stunning as well, and used some, I mean, just for me, really interesting visuals. You want to talk a little bit about your exhibit?
Sure. So I also did my graduate exhibition for studio art. This exhibition was called Ragnarok, to kind of go along with my thesis as well.
And what does that mean?
Ragnarok means twilight of the gods in Old Norse,
Mm-hmm.
and it refers to, um, well, in Christianity, it would be called Armageddon, or Judgment Day.
Mm-hmm.
Ragnarok is the end of all things, but then life that comes after that again. It's not an end of all ends. It's a wildfire that clears out, the bad
Mm-hmm.
in the forest so that the new growth can come.
Yeah. It was a stunning exhibit.
Thank you.
And we will have pictures. We will have a story on this,
Oh.
and so we will have pictures from that exhibit online as well as photos of the artifact. And I'm blanking on the name. We've only said it a million times.
The Hårby figure.
The Hårby figure. There we go. All right. So Sarah, what is next for you?
I don't have an answer for you,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm smiling because this is the first time in my life that I don't have an answer for what's next, and that's extremely exciting for me. I am in the middle of a pretty big move out of state with my partner, and he and I are starting our lives together. I'm hoping to get back to painting when I set up my home studio,
Mm-hmm.
and I have some ideas for a couple series.
Right on.
But that's about where I'm at.
All right. Is there anything I missed? Anything you'd like to add?
Just a huge, huge thank you to everyone who supported me in my academic and artistic journey here.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. And while Day of Giving is over, you can still support student success through the Dean's Council Annual Fund. Just visit cah.fresnostate.edu and click on Give in the menu. Then you just follow the instructions. The College of Arts and Humanities holds dozens of public events every semester. For the latest concerts, theater performance, art shows, and lectures, visit calendar.fresnostate.edu. And we'll see you next week for another edition of Artful Discourse. Artful Discourse is a production of the College of Arts and Humanities at California State University, Fresno. The Dean is Dr. Honora Chapman, and the Associate Dean is Dr. Sergio Laporta. This program is written, directed, and produced by me, Benjamin Kirk, the college's communication specialist. The theme song for Artful Discourse is Maiden Voyage by Fresno State music professor Benjamin Boone from his album, Joy. More information about his music can be found at benjaminboone.com. Special thanks to KFSR and FSR Underground General Manager Julie Lindahl for making this show possible. You can learn more about the College of Arts and Humanities and find an archive of our shows at our website, cah.fresnostate.edu, or on our blog, fresnostatecah.com.